Long before the age of satellites and superhighways, when the world was still a vast and uncharted puzzle, one civilization dared to venture beyond the horizon. They were the Phoenicians, master navigators, cunning traders, and the unsung architects of the first global trade network. Think about that for a moment. While most ancient cultures were content to barter within their own valleys or along familiar rivers, these seafaring pioneers looked to the open ocean and saw not a barrier but a highway. Their story isn't just about ships and cargo. It's about how a single group of people rewrote the rules of commerce, culture, and connection, leaving a legacy that still shapes our world today. Picture this, a bustling port city along the Mediterranean coast around 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with the smell of salt and cedar, the docks alive with the clamor of hammers and hawkers. Here, Phoenician craftsmen are building vessels unlike anything the world has ever seen, sleek, sturdy ships capable of braving the open sea. These weren't just boats, they were the spaceships of their time, carrying not just goods but ideas, innovations, and entire ways of life across continents. From the purple dyes that adorned royalty to the alphabet that would become the foundation of modern writing, the Phoenicians didn't just move products, they moved civilization forward. What's truly astonishing is how little we talk about them today. We celebrate the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, yet it was the Phoenicians who knit their worlds together. They were the original globalists, the first to prove that distance was no match for human ingenuity. So how did they do it? What drove them to risk everything on the unpredictable waves? And why does their story matter now, in an age of instant communication and overnight shipping? Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover the secrets of their shipbuilding brilliance, trace their daring routes from the coasts of Lebanon to the shores of Britain and beyond, and reveal how their spirit of exploration echoes in every container ship and trade agreement today. This isn't just history, it's the origin story of the interconnected world we take for granted. So ready your sea legs, we're about to dive deep into the epic tale of the Phoenician Sea Kings. To understand the Phoenicians, we must first step into their world, a narrow strip of fertile land wedged between towering mountains and the endless Mediterranean. Unlike the sprawling empires of Egypt or Mesopotamia, with their vast farmlands and monumental cities, the Phoenician homeland was small, rugged, and resource-scarce. But where others saw limitation, they saw opportunity. By 1500 BC, their coastal cities Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos had transformed into buzzing hubs of industry and trade. Imagine walking through Tyre at its peak, artisans crafting delicate glassware, dyers boiling sea snails to extract precious purple hues, and merchants haggling over cedar timber so prized that Egyptian pharaohs demanded it for their temples. What truly defined them wasn't just what they built but how they thought. While neighboring kingdoms waged wars over territory, the Phoenicians played the long game. They knew control of the sea meant control of commerce, so they mastered both. Their ships, built from the famed cedars of Lebanon, weren't just vessels but floating warehouses, carrying everything from olive oil to exotic spices. And their innovations didn't stop at shipbuilding. Take their alphabet, a stroke of genius that replaced complex hieroglyphs and cuneiform with just 22 simple characters. This wasn't just a writing system, it was a revolution in communication, one that would eventually shape Greek, Latin, and even the letters you're reading now. Yet their greatest legacy might be their courage to sail into the unknown. While most ancient cultures clung to coastal waters, Phoenician explorers like Hanno the Navigator ventured as far as West Africa and some theories suggest their ships may have even crossed the Atlantic. Whether that's true or not, their willingness to push boundaries redefined what was possible. In a world where distance meant danger, they saw connection. Where others feared the horizon, they chased it, and in doing so, they laid the invisible rails of the first global economy, a network of trade routes that would endure for millennia. The secret to Phoenician dominance on the high seas wasn't just bravery or luck, it was their revolutionary shipbuilding genius. While other ancient cultures cobbled together simple rafts or hollowed out logs, Phoenician craftsmen approached their work like engineers solving a complex puzzle. Every detail, from the choice of wood to the curve of the hull, was meticulously calculated for one purpose: to conquer the unpredictable Mediterranean. Their prized material was Lebanon's towering cedar forests, whose straight, resin-rich trunks resisted rot and insects far better than ordinary timber. Imagine teams of workers carefully selecting each tree, then shaping the fragrant wood into planks so precisely fitted that they barely needed nails, a technique later admired by everyone from the Greeks to the Bible's King Solomon. But what truly set their ships apart were the innovations hidden beneath the surface. Take the Bireme, their signature warship, with its double banks of oars that could propel it at breathtaking speeds. This wasn't just about power, it was about control. While single-level ships struggled against crosscurrents, Phoenician captains could maneuver with pinpoint accuracy, darting between rocks or pivoting to ram rival vessels. And their merchant ships, these floating fortresses, featured reinforced hulls with internal ribs, an ancient precursor to modern skeleton framing that allowed them to carry staggering loads of olive oil, wine, or precious metals without buckling. Perhaps most impressive was their mastery of the elements. Phoenician sails weren't simple cloth sheets but adjustable systems with brailing ropes that let crews quickly reduce sail area during storms, a life-saving feature when squalls appeared without warning. They even waterproofed their vessels using heated tar from Dead Sea bitumen pits, creating a seal so effective that some ships remained seaworthy for decades. This blend of practicality and innovation extended to their navigation tools too. Though they lacked compasses, they pioneered the use of celestial markers and coastal landmarks, developing route maps so accurate that later civilizations would copy them for centuries. Yet their greatest advantage wasn't just technology, it was mindset. While others saw ships as tools, the Phoenicians treated each vessel as a living partnership with the sea. Their captains understood wave patterns like farmers know seasons, reading subtle changes in wind and water to plot courses others deemed impassable. This symbiotic relationship with the ocean allowed them to establish trade colonies from Cyprus to Cadiz, turning the Mediterranean into what historians now call a Phoenician lake. Their vessels became the circulatory system of the ancient world, carrying not just goods but the very lifeblood of cultural exchange, proving that true mastery isn't about conquering nature, but learning to move with it. In the ancient world, color wasn't just decoration, it was power, and no color held more sway than Tyrian purple, the Phoenicians' most dazzling innovation. This wasn't simply dye, it was liquid royalty, a shade so vivid it seemed to capture the Mediterranean sunset in every thread. The secret lay in the unlikeliest of places, the mucus glands of the murex snail, a creature no bigger than your thumb. Harvesting it required back-breaking labor. 12,000 snails might yield just a single gram of pure pigment. Picture teams of workers scouring rocky coastlines, cracking open shells by the thousands, then patiently simmering the glands in vats of salt water for days until the solution transformed from murky yellow to deep, luminous violet. The Phoenicians didn't invent this process. Traces of purple dye predate them, but they perfected it into an industrial-scale art form. Their workshops in Tyre and Sidon became ancient versions of high-tech labs, where master dyers developed secret techniques to produce consistent shades ranging from rich burgundy to bluish purple. This quality control was crucial because their customers weren't just anyone. When Roman senators wanted their togas edged with purple stripes, when Egyptian pharaohs demanded royal robes, when Persian kings decorated their palaces, they turned to Phoenician traders. The dye became so synonymous with power that sumptuary laws across civilizations restricted its use. In some eras, wearing full purple garments was punishable by death unless you were emperor. What's remarkable isn't just the prestige of Tyrian purple, but how the Phoenicians transformed a local resource into a global phenomenon. They didn't just sell jars of dye, they built an entire ecosystem around it. Shipping routes specialized in transporting the pigment safely. Exposure to sunlight could ruin it, so vessels carried the dye in sealed lead containers. Merchants established trading posts specifically to distribute it from Carthage to Corinth. Even the waste from dye production became a commodity. Archaeologists have found mounds of crushed murex shells repurposed as construction material across the Mediterranean. This wasn't merely commerce, it was psychological mastery. The Phoenicians understood something fundamental about human nature. Scarcity creates desire, and desire drives profit. By controlling every step of the process from harvesting to distribution, they maintained a near monopoly for centuries. The color became a status symbol, not just because it was beautiful, but because everyone knew how much effort and how many snails went into producing it. In many ways, Tyrian purple foreshadowed modern luxury branding, where value lies as much in perception as in the product itself. Yet beyond wealth and influence, the purple trade reveals something deeper about Phoenician society. While other ancient cultures poured resources into pyramids or ziggurats, they invested in knowledge, the meticulous chemistry of dye extraction, the logistics of global distribution, the artistry of color grading. Their greatest monument wasn't built of stone, but of countless tiny shells and the bold idea that something so small could color the ancient world. Among all the treasures the Phoenicians carried across the waves, silver, glass, that legendary purple dye, none had a more profound impact than the humble marks they scratched onto clay and parchment. Their alphabet wasn't just a writing system, it was a quiet revolution, a key that unlocked literacy for civilizations far beyond their shores. Picture the scene, a bustling port where traders from Egypt, Greece, and Anatolia huddle over shipping manifests. Instead of struggling with hundreds of intricate hieroglyphs or the wedge-shaped symbols of cuneiform, they encounter just 22 straightforward characters. Each represents a consonant sound, simple enough to learn in days rather than years. For the first time in history, writing wasn't reserved for scribes and priests. It was something a merchant could jot down between unloading cargo and haggling over prices. What made this system revolutionary was its elegant simplicity. Earlier scripts like Egyptian hieroglyphs required memorizing hundreds of symbols, some representing whole words or concepts. The Phoenicians stripped writing down to its essence, sounds. Their abjada, a term scholars use for consonant-based alphabets, worked like building blocks. Combine a few characters and you could spell out names, record transactions, or send messages across vast distances. This wasn't just practical, it was transformative. Suddenly, contracts could be standardized, laws codified, and stories preserved without relying on oral tradition alone. The alphabet spread reeds like a map of cultural exchange. Greek traders adapted it around 800 BCE, adding vowels to suit their language, a modification that birthed the script we associate with Socrates and Homer. From there, it traveled to Italy, where the Etruscans and later the Romans refined it into the Latin alphabet that dominates Western languages today. Even scripts like Hebrew and Arabic trace their roots back to those original Phoenician strokes. Every time you type an email or read a street sign, you're using a descendant of that ingenious system. But the real magic lay in how this tool democratized knowledge. In societies where writing had been a guarded privilege, the Phoenician alphabet turned literacy into a practical skill. A farmer could tally his harvest, a sailor could note navigational landmarks, communities could share ideas without gatekeepers. This subtle shift laid groundwork for everything from Athenian democracy to the scientific method systems that rely on shared information and debate. Perhaps most telling is how the alphabet outlasted the civilization that created it. While Phoenician cities faded into history, their letters kept evolving, crossing borders and epochs. That's the irony. A people remembered as master traders left their most enduring legacy not in goods, but in the very symbols we use to tell their story. The next time you scribble a note or swipe through your phone, take a second to appreciate those unassuming letters. They're the silent partners to every great idea humanity has ever written down. The Phoenician trade network wasn't merely a collection of shipping lanes, it was the ancient world's first superhighway, stitching together distant lands in a web of commerce and culture that stretched from the foggy shores of Britain to the sun-baked markets of Arabia. At the heart of this system lay a radical idea that no place was too remote if it held something valuable. Take the tin mines of Cornwall, nearly 2,000 miles from their homeland. While others saw only the peril of sailing beyond the Mediterranean's warm embrace, Phoenician merchants calculated the worth of that dull gray metal essential for making bronze and braved the Atlantic's treacherous currents to secure it. Their strategy was as meticulous as it was bold. Instead of relying on chance encounters, they planted permanent trading posts at strategic choke points. Carthage, founded as a humble way station on the North African coast, blossomed into an empire of its own. Cadiz, perched on Spain's southern tip, became a gateway to the Atlantic's riches. These weren't just ports, they were cultural crucibles where Phoenician, Greek, Egyptian, and local traditions simmered together. Archaeologists find evidence of this fusion everywhere, from Iberian tombs adorned with Phoenician glass to Sicilian temples where local gods wore hybridized names. What set their network apart was its adaptability. In Sardinia, they traded polished obsidian for Sardinian silver. Along the Levant, they swapped cedar wood for Mesopotamian textiles. Each route had its own rhythm. Slow, heavy ships lumbered with Spanish silver one way, returned light and fast with Egyptian papyrus. They even mastered the monsoon winds of the Arabian Sea, riding seasonal gusts to India and back like ancient maritime surfers. This wasn't haphazard bartering, but a calculated system where information mattered as much as inventory. Captains kept mental ledgers of regional shortages, knowing a drought in Cyprus might spike olive oil prices in Byblos next season. The true genius lay in what they carried between the lines. Alongside amphorae of wine and ingots of copper sailed revolutionary ideas, advanced metallurgy from Anatolia, astronomical knowledge from Babylon, artistic motifs from Crete. Their ships became floating universities, disseminating technologies like blown glass and standardized weights. Even religious concepts traveled these routes. The worship of Astarte, their fertility goddess, spread as far west as Portugal, while elements of Egyptian Isis worship seeped into Phoenician rituals. This network's resilience was legendary. When Assyrian armies overran their homeland, the trading posts endured. When Greek competitors arose, Phoenician merchants simply went farther, pushing past Gibraltar to establish secret tin routes. Their legacy lingers in places like Malta, where descendants of Phoenician settlers still speak a language peppered with ancient Semitic words. More than merchants, they were the original connectors, proof that civilization advances not through isolation, but through the endless exchange of goods, ideas, and trust across the waves. Of all the seeds planted by Phoenician traders across the Mediterranean, none grew as mighty as Carthage. What began as a simple way station, just another docking point for ships carrying Tyrian purple and Spanish silver, evolved into something extraordinary. By 500 BC, this North African settlement had transformed into a metropolis that made even Rome nervous. Its harbors bristled with merchant vessels, its warehouses overflowed with goods from 3 continents, and its streets buzzed with a mix of Berber, Greek, and Phoenician tongues. Carthage wasn't just a colony, it was Phoenician ingenuity distilled to its most potent form, proof that their mercantile model could scale into an empire. The secret to Carthage's success lay in its DNA. From its founding around 800 BCE, it inherited the Phoenician playbook: adaptability, maritime mastery, and an almost obsessive focus on trade. But the Carthaginians didn't just copy their ancestors, they upgraded the formula. Their shipyards produced vessels with deeper holds and reinforced keels, allowing them to transport elephants alongside olive oil. Their merchants developed sophisticated contracts using standardized weights and measures, reducing disputes across languages and cultures. Even their religion reflected this commercial spirit, with temples doubling as banks where traders could secure loans under the watchful eyes of the gods. No figure embodies Carthage's audacity like Hannibal Barca. His march across the Alps with war elephants in 218 BC wasn't just a military stunt, it was a masterclass in Phoenician-style problem-solving. Facing Rome's naval blockade, he didn't confront their strength at sea. He circumvented it entirely, leveraging local knowledge of Alpine passes and Celtic alliances. That same creative pragmatism defined Carthage's entire approach. When soil salinity threatened their farmlands, they pioneered advanced irrigation. When rival powers closed traditional trade routes, they charted new ones, reaching as far as Britain for tin and West Africa for gold. Yet Carthage's story also carries a haunting irony. The very traits that made it formidable, its commercial focus, its decentralized governance, left it vulnerable when Rome demanded total war. Unlike the legionaries who fought for imperial glory, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries, a system that worked splendidly in peacetime but fractured under prolonged conflict. And when Rome finally breached its walls in 146 BCE, the destruction was so complete that legends claim the earth was salted to prevent rebirth. But Carthage's true legacy isn't measured in ruins. Long after its fall, its innovations percolated through the ancient world. Roman senators adopted Carthaginian agricultural techniques to boost crop yields. The naval tactics that once challenged Rome became standard in imperial fleets. Even the word Punic, Rome's term for its great rival, evolved from Phoenician, a silent nod to the colony's origins. Carthage proved that ideas, like trade goods, never truly disappear. They simply change hands, finding new lives in unexpected places. Imagine setting sail into the vast unknown with no GPS, no printed charts, just the sky above and the waves below. This was the daily reality for Phoenician navigators, who turned celestial patterns and natural clues into a precision guidance system centuries before magnetic compasses reached the Mediterranean. Their secret weapon wasn't technology in the way we think of it today, but an intimate dialogue with nature itself. Take Polaris, the North Star, which held steady while other stars wheeled across the night sky. Phoenician sailors called it the Phoenician Star, using its fixed position like a celestial lighthouse to maintain latitude during open water crossings. On cloudy nights, they switched to secondary methods tracking the swell direction of waves or noting shifts in wind patterns that hinted at nearby land. Coastal voyages revealed even more ingenious tricks. Crews carried cages of caged birds, releasing them periodically. If the creatures flew toward land, ships adjusted course accordingly. They memorized the scent of certain coastal pine forests carried offshore by breezes, and learned to distinguish between the turquoise tint of shallow waters versus the deep indigo of open sea. Currents became roadmaps. The predictable flow along North Africa's coast served as a liquid conveyor belt toward the Atlantic, while eddies near Sicily marked turning points for routes to Sardinia. Even something as simple as spotting seabird droppings on the water could signal an island over the horizon. The boldest voyages hint at knowledge we're still unraveling. Herodotus recorded an expedition commissioned by Egyptian pharaoh Necho around 600 BCE, where Phoenician ships allegedly circumnavigated Africa, a journey dismissed as fantasy until modern oceanography confirmed the seasonal winds and currents make it possible. Then there's the mystery of their tin trade. Ancient sources describe a place called the Cassiterides, likely the British Isles, where Phoenician merchants reportedly sourced the precious metal under veils of secrecy. Some accounts suggest they deliberately spread tales of sea monsters and ships swallowing whirlpools to deter competitors from following their routes. What's often overlooked is how they systematized this knowledge. Unlike lone explorers relying on intuition, Phoenician navigation was repeatable and teachable. Senior pilots trained apprentices in star sequences, current patterns, and the subtle art of dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed and direction when landmarks vanished. This institutional wisdom allowed their trade networks to thrive for centuries, weathering storms and political upheavals. Their legacy lingers in techniques still used by traditional Polynesian navigators today, proving that the most durable technology isn't always made of metal and gears, but of observation, memory, and the courage to trust nature's whispers. The Phoenicians understood something modern diplomats strive for, that the most enduring trade routes aren't paved with gold, but with shared stories and traditions. While their ships carried tangible goods, their real cargo was culture, acting as the ancient world's unofficial ambassadors. Take the vibrant murals of Crete's Minoan palaces, where Egyptian lotus motifs mingle with Mesopotamian geometric patterns, a visual dialogue made possible by Phoenician merchants who transported not just the designs, but the artisans who could replicate them. Or consider the olive presses of Sardinia, where local farmers adapted Phoenician techniques to boost yields, then traded their improved oil back to the very cities that taught them. This wasn't a one-way broadcast of ideas, but a lively exchange where every port became a classroom. Religious practices reveal this fusion most vividly. In Cyprus, archaeologists uncovered temples where the Phoenician goddess Astarte was worshipped alongside Greek Aphrodite and Egyptian Hathor, three deities blending into a single protective figure sailors called upon before voyages. Even something as mundane as bread tells a story. Phoenician ships introduced sesame seeds from Mesopotamia to North Africa, where bakers incorporated them into flatbreads that eventually evolved into the simit rings still sold on Istanbul's streets today. Their role as cultural conduits extended to language too. The Hebrew word for gold, zarav, comes directly from the Phoenician dahab, while ancient Greek borrowed terms for nautical gear like ankyra, anchor, from their Semitic trading partners. What set their approach apart was its organic nature. Unlike later empires that imposed culture through conquest, Phoenician influence spread through curiosity and mutual benefit. A potter in Sicily might adopt Phoenician glaze techniques because they produced more durable wares, not because some foreign king demanded it. This voluntary adoption created hybrid art forms, Etruscan tombs adorned with Phoenician-style silver mirrors, or Iberian jewelry featuring Egyptian scarabs set in distinctly local design. Even their famed purple dye became a cultural chameleon. In Rome, it signaled political rank, in Persia it adorned royal tents, and in Celtic Britain it tinted ceremonial robes. The ripple effects reached astonishing distances. Some scholars trace the origins of Spanish flamenco's intricate hand movements to Phoenician dancers who performed in Andalusian trading posts. The fermented fish sauce they traded from Carthage garum became a culinary craze from Pompeii to Gaul, the Roman-era equivalent of today's global hot sauce obsession. Perhaps most remarkably, their alphabet's journey mirrors their cultural impact, adapted by the Greeks, passed to the Etruscans, then transformed into the Latin script that now dominates global communication. This cultural web didn't just spread outward, it also transformed the Phoenicians themselves. After generations of contact with Egyptian priests, their creation myths incorporated elements of the Osiris legend. Exposure to Babylonian astronomy refined their navigational star charts. Even their ship designs evolved, incorporating Iberian oak for hulls and Cypriot pine for masts where local materials proved superior. In the end, their greatest legacy wasn't the goods they moved, but the invisible threads they wove between civilizations, threads that, long after their cities faded, continued to connect cultures in ways no ledger could ever record. For the Phoenicians, the sea wasn't just a livelihood, it was a sacred force, as unpredictable and mighty as the gods themselves. At the center of their spiritual world stood Baal, the storm deity whose voice was the thunder and whose breath stirred the waves. Unlike the distant sky gods of other ancient cultures, Baal was intimately tied to the rhythms of Phoenician life. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage, farmers sought his rains for their crops, and merchants left offerings at his altars before risky voyages. His temples, like the towering sanctuary in Tyre, weren't quiet places of meditation but vibrant hubs where the scent of burning incense mixed with the salty tang of the nearby harbor. The rituals performed there reveal a world shaped by both awe and necessity. During droughts, priests enacted dramatic ceremonies to summon rain, clashing cymbals to mimic thunder, and pouring water over Baal's statue to symbolically trigger his mercy. Maritime festivals featured model ships carried in procession, their tiny sails billowing with prayers for prosperous trade winds. But the most controversial practice, one still debated by archaeologists, involved sacrificial offerings. Ancient sources like the Roman historian Cleitarchus describe grim ceremonies where children, often firstborn sons, were placed in the arms of a bronze Baal statue before falling into flames below. While some scholars argue these accounts are exaggerated propaganda from Phoenicia's enemies, excavations at Carthage Tophet Cemetery uncovered thousands of urns containing charred infant bones, suggesting at least some form of ritual offering occurred. What's often overlooked is how these beliefs mirrored Phoenician pragmatism. Baal wasn't just worshipped out of fear, he was a divine partner in their ventures. A captain surviving a storm might dedicate a portion of his cargo to the god's temple, viewing the loss not as theft but as a fair exchange for divine favor. This transactional spirituality extended to their pantheon's other members, like Astarte, goddess of fertility and war, whose priestesses facilitated sacred marriages to ensure abundant harvests and thriving trade. Even their funerary practices reflected their seafaring identity, with tombs often shaped like ships to carry the deceased into the afterlife. The spread of these religious ideas reveals their cultural flexibility. When Phoenician traders established colonies, they didn't impose their gods but found common ground. In Cyprus, Baal merged with local storm deities to become Baal Hammon. In Carthage, he absorbed traits of Egyptian Ammon, gaining a ram's horns iconography. This adaptability made their faith surprisingly portable. Greek sailors adopted Astarte as Aphrodite Euploia, Aphrodite of good sailing, while elements of Baal worship later resurfaced in biblical descriptions of Canaanite practices. At its core, Phoenician religion was a dialogue with uncertainty. Every voyage risked shipwreck, every harvest depended on capricious rains, and every business deal crossed linguistic and cultural divides. Their rituals weren't just superstition, but a way to impose order on chaos, to seek patterns in the storm. That same impulse drove their celestial navigation and trade calculations, proof that for the Phoenicians, the sacred and the practical were never truly separate. Even their alphabet may have had divine roots. Some inscriptions suggest they believed the letters themselves were gifts from the god Toyutos, making every contract and cargo list an act of reverence. Their legacy reminds us that commerce and creed have always been intertwined, each shaping the other in ways that ripple far beyond temple walls. Even the greatest empires face tides they cannot turn, and for the Phoenicians, the currents of history began shifting irrevocably by the 4th century BC. The first cracks appeared not from the sea they mastered, but from the land they'd always viewed as a secondary concern: the relentless march of Mesopotamian armies. Assyrian forces, hungry for coastal wealth, stormed through Phoenician cities in the 8th century BC, extracting tributes of silver and timber while allowing local kings to remain as puppet rulers. This delicate balance collapsed when Babylon's Nebuchadnezzar II laid siege to Tyre for 13 grueling years, a blockade so brutal it became biblical legend. Remarkably, the island city held out, but the ordeal left it a shadow of its former self, its once bustling docks eerily quiet, its trade networks fraying like weathered ropes. Yet conquest alone doesn't explain their fading star. Enter the Greeks, fast-learning newcomers who reverse-engineered Phoenician ship designs while adding lethal innovations. Where Phoenician vessels prioritized cargo space, Greek triremes emphasized speed and ramming power. Their competing colonies sprouted like rival market stalls across the Mediterranean, from Marseille to the Black Sea. The final blow came in 332 BC, when Alexander the Great demanded Tyre's surrender during his war with Persia. Confident in their island fortress, the Tyrians refused. What followed was one of antiquity's most audacious sieges. Alexander's engineers built a kilometer-long causeway to reach the city, using rubble from the abandoned mainland settlement as landfill. After 7 months, Tyre fell, its surviving citizens enslaved, its legendary purple dye workshops reduced to ashes. But here's where the story defies simple endings. Phoenician culture didn't disappear, it mutated. Carthage inherited their mercantile prowess, evolving it into something fiercer. Their alphabet became the building blocks for half the world's scripts. Even their trade routes endured, repurposed first by Greek merchants, then Roman exporters shipping Spanish olive oil to imperial legions. Modern DNA studies reveal Phoenician genetic markers still present in coastal communities from Lebanon to Portugal, silent witnesses to centuries of intermarriage along their trading posts. Perhaps their true legacy lies in proving civilizations don't simply rise and fall, they disperse. Like their signature purple dye seeping into fabrics, Phoenician ideas permeated cultures across 3 continents. Their ships may have stopped sailing, but their influence floats on in every alphabet letter, every long-distance trade deal, every sailor who still looks to the stars and trusts the horizon. If you held a piece of Phoenician artwork in your hand, say, an ivory hair comb carved with sphinxes or a delicate glass perfume bottle, you'd be holding more than an object. You'd be cradling a conversation between civilizations. Phoenician artisans didn't just make things, they wove together the artistic DNA of the ancient world. Take their signature ivory carvings, often inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli. At first glance, you might mistake them for Egyptian art with their hieroglyphic-style figures. But look closer, the facial features show hints of Greek realism, while the geometric patterns echo Mesopotamian designs. This wasn't imitation, it was alchemy, transforming borrowed elements into something entirely new. Their mastery of materials was equally groundbreaking. While most ancient glasswork involved painstakingly molding cooled sheets around clay forms, Phoenician craftsmen in Sidon may have pioneered a revolutionary alternative: glass blowing. Picture an artisan gathering molten glass on a hollow rod, then breathing life into it like a metalworker shaping bronze. This technique allowed for thinner walls, intricate shapes, and unprecedented speed. Suddenly, what had been luxury items for pharaohs could be produced for wealthy merchants, spreading from Assyrian palaces to Etruscan tombs. Archaeologists still debate whether they invented the method outright or simply perfected it, but either way, their workshops became the Silicon Valley of ancient glass, setting standards that would dominate Mediterranean trade for centuries. Textiles reveal another layer of their genius. Using dyes extracted from murex shells, saffron, and crushed insects, they produced fabrics so vibrant that Homer described them as gleaming like the sun. But their real innovation was in the weave itself. By combining Egyptian linen with Mesopotamian wool spinning techniques, they created hybrid fabrics that were both lightweight and durable, perfect for sailing across climates. A single Phoenician robe might incorporate patterns from 5 cultures, becoming a wearable map of trade routes. What truly set their craftsmanship apart wasn't just skill, but a mercantile mindset. Artisans tailored their work to local tastes: scarabs for Egyptian buyers, heroic Greek figures for Aegean clients, and mythical hybrid creatures for Levantine temples. Even their failures became innovations. When a batch of glass turned cloudy from impure sand, they rebranded it as Alexandrian glass, creating a new fashion trend. Their workshops functioned like modern design studios, where a single piece might pass through hands specializing in ivory, metals, and pigments before reaching completion. The legacy of this artistic synthesis lingers in unexpected places. Roman emperors coveted Phoenician purple-dyed silk centuries after Tyre's fall. Byzantine mosaics borrowed their glass formulas. And that hybrid aesthetic, part Egyptian, part Greek, entirely unique, became the visual language of empires far beyond their shores. In the end, their greatest artwork wasn't any single artifact, but the proof that beauty thrives where cultures collide. Tin wasn't just a commodity to the ancient world, it was the secret ingredient that powered an era. Without it, bronze couldn't exist, and without bronze, civilizations from Egypt to Mesopotamia would have been left with fragile copper tools and vulnerable armies. This is where the Phoenicians stepped in as the unsung matchmakers of the Bronze Age. Their ships bridged the gap between the tin-rich mines of Cornwall in distant Britain and the smelting furnaces of the Mediterranean, turning scarcity into abundance. Imagine the scene. Deep in the rugged hills of what's now southwest England, miners chipped away at narrow tin veins, their flickering torches casting shadows on walls that hadn't seen sunlight for centuries. That dull gray metal, once extracted, would travel overland to coastal trading posts, where Phoenician merchants bartered goods like olive oil and finely crafted glass for ingots that would reshape the ancient world. What made this trade extraordinary wasn't just the distance, it was the logistics. Tin from Cornwall had to cross treacherous Atlantic currents, skirt the stormy Bay of Biscay, and navigate Gibraltar's swirling tides before reaching safe harbors in Tyre or Sidon. Along Spain's Guadalquivir River, alternative sources offered slightly easier access, but the Phoenicians often preferred the longer route. Why? Secrecy. By controlling knowledge of tin's origins, they maintained a near monopoly, spinning tales of mythical islands guarded by sea monsters to deter competitors. Some historians believe they even mixed Cornish tin with lesser quality Iberian supplies to obscure the true source, an ancient version of corporate espionage. The ripple effects of this trade transformed societies. Bronze, a blend of 90% copper and 10% tin, was the steel of its day. From the plows that broke tough Mediterranean soil to the swords that defended city walls, this alloy underpinned both survival and conquest. When the Hittites forged superior bronze weapons, or Minoan artisans cast intricate ritual vessels, they relied on Phoenician middlemen to keep the tin flowing. Even the legendary Mycenaean shaft graves, with their troves of bronze armor and weaponry, owe their splendor to those long-distance supply chains. But here's the twist: the Phoenicians didn't just move tin, they accelerated innovation. By creating a stable supply, they enabled metallurgists to experiment with new bronze formulations. A slight increase in tin produced harder blades, a reduction allowed for more malleable decorative work. Their networks became a feedback loop, where demand from armorers in Assyria or toolmakers in Crete spurred refinements in mining techniques back in Cornwall. This wasn't merely trade, it was a collaborative engine of progress, proving that commerce and technology have always been inseparable partners. The ultimate testament to their influence lies in what happened when tin supplies faltered. During the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC, disruptions to trade routes triggered a cascade of shortages. Armies found themselves outmatched, artisans struggled to replace worn tools, and entire economies sputtered. The Phoenicians' later resurgence as masters of the tin trade helped stitch the Mediterranean back together, paving the way for the Iron Age. Their story reminds us that behind every great leap in human history, there are often unsung suppliers, the ones who deliver not just goods, but the very building blocks of civilization. The Phoenicians didn't just guard their trade routes, they weaponized secrecy, turning geography itself into a competitive advantage. Picture a Greek merchant in the 6th century BC, his ship carefully trailing a Phoenician vessel at a discreet distance, hoping to uncover the path to those legendary tin mines in the far west. According to Herodotus, the Phoenician captain, realizing he was being shadowed, intentionally steered his ship into shallow waters, running it aground to strand the nosy outsider. As the Greek crew scrambled to save their own vessel, the Phoenicians calmly waited for high tide to float free, leaving their rival stuck, a masterclass in maritime sabotage. This wasn't just petty rivalry, it was a calculated strategy to protect what we'd now call intellectual property. Their clandestine tactics went far beyond trickery. Phoenician navigators reportedly carried 2 sets of logs, one with real coordinates for trusted crew, another with false bearings to mislead spies. They spread terrifying myths about the Atlantic's edge, where the sea supposedly boiled under a sun too close to bear, or where giant whirlpools dragged ships into oblivion. These weren't just stories, they were psychological barriers designed to deter competitors. Even their trade contracts contained deliberate omissions, with key destinations referred to only by code names like the Metal Islands for Britain or Ophir for potential gold sources in Africa. Yet this obsession with secrecy came at a cost. Unlike the Greeks, who meticulously documented their voyages, Phoenicians left few written records of their routes. When Carthage fell to Rome in 146 BC, the victorious Romans famously sifted through its libraries hoping to uncover navigational charts, only to find most had been destroyed to keep them from enemy hands. What little survived, like the rare Periplus, a kind of ancient sailing manual, offered tantalizing fragments. One such text mentions a 40-day voyage beyond Gibraltar to a land of honey-colored natives, trading in gold dust, likely West Africa, but gives no precise bearings. Modern archaeology has become a detective game, piecing together their reach from scattered clues. Tin ingots recovered from shipwrecks off Turkey bear chemical signatures matching Cornish mines. Carthaginian coins found in the Azores suggest they may have ventured far into the Atlantic. Even the humble olive pit tells a story Phoenician introduced olive varieties took root in Sardinia and Spain, marking their colonial footprint. The irony, their very secrecy amplified their mystique. Greek geographers like Pytheas, who later ventured beyond Gibraltar, built their own maps by interviewing Phoenician sailors in hushed tavern conversations. Roman merchants paid exorbitant sums for retired Phoenician pilots to whisper coordinates. In trying to hoard knowledge, they accidentally turned it into the ancient world's most coveted commodity, proving that some secrets are too valuable to keep forever. The Bible's pages rustle with the sails of Phoenician ships, their presence woven into scripture as both ally and admonition. Tyre and Sidon weren't just distant dots on a map to the Israelites, they were power players whose wealth and craftsmanship left fingerprints on Jerusalem's most sacred spaces. Take King Hiram of Tyre, whose name appears in the Book of Kings not as a foreigner but as a trusted collaborator. When Solomon sought to build his temple, it was Hiram who supplied the legendary cedar beams, floated down the coast from Lebanon's forests, along with bronze workers whose skill turned molten metal into intricate pillars named jachin and bows. These weren't mere transactions, they were diplomatic masterstrokes binding two kingdoms through shared sacred architecture, yet the relationship was never simple. Prophets like Ezekiel wielded blistering metaphors against Tyre's merchants, comparing their city to a ship so overloaded with riches it would sink under divine judgment. Your heart has become proud because of your wealth. The scripture chastises, painting Phoenician traders as cautionary figures intoxicated by their own success. Isaiah went further, calling Tyre the marketplace of nations, only to predict its humbling, a reminder that no earthly empire escapes the tides of time. These passages reveal more than moral warnings. They're snapshots of a world where Phoenician goods from purple cloth to cedar resin for incense permeated even the most devout corners of Israelite life. Archaeology breathes life into these textual echoes. Excavations at Hazor uncovered fragments of Phoenician-style ivory inlays, likely looted by invading armies but originally traded for Israelite wheat or olive oil. The very language of commerce seeped into scripture. Hebrew borrowed Phoenician terms for nautical gear like anchor, ogen, and sail, mithras, while Canaanite deities like Baal crept into prophetic condemnations of idolatry. Even Jesus would later invoke Tyre and Sidon not as villains but as examples of unexpected faith, suggesting their cultural influence outlasted their political power. What emerges is a portrait of mutual dependence laced with tension. The Israelites needed Phoenician timber and craftsmanship. The Phoenicians craved access to inland trade routes and agricultural surplus. Their interactions, sometimes cooperative, often competitive, mirror modern debates about globalization's double edge, the blessings of exchange versus the perils of excess. The Bible preserves this duality, honoring Hiram's generosity while lamenting Tyre's hubris, a nuanced take on history rarely afforded to ancient rivals. In the end, Scripture didn't just record the Phoenicians, it immortalized them as both architects and cautionary tales, their ships forever docked in the harbor of sacred memory. While ancient Athens confined women to domestic quarters and Egypt limited their roles to religious and familial spheres, Phoenician society charted a strikingly different course. Records etched into clay tablets and stone stelae paint a picture of women conducting business deals, inheriting family estates, and even commissioning ships for overseas trade. One particularly revealing document from Sidon details a woman named Eshmanama purchasing a vineyard and hiring laborers without any male guardian's oversight, a transaction that would have been unthinkable in neighboring Mesopotamia. This wasn't mere exception but embedded practice. Legal texts from Ugarit show daughters inheriting equal shares alongside sons, their names boldly listed on property deeds rather than hidden behind male relatives. The legendary Queen Dido embodies this progressive spirit most dramatically. When political turmoil forced her to flee Tyre after her brother murdered her husband, she didn't seek refuge in another kingdom. She negotiated for land in North Africa and founded Carthage herself. Ancient historians like Justin describe her clever ruse with the oxhide, bargaining for only as much land as a single hide could cover, then cutting it into thin strips to encircle an entire hilltop. Whether myth or embellished fact, the story resonates because it reflects a cultural truth. Phoenician women could operate in spheres of power typically reserved for men elsewhere in the ancient world. What fueled this relative equality? Look to the demands of their mercantile civilization. With men frequently away on voyages lasting months or years, women naturally assumed roles as estate managers, trade negotiators, and financial stewards. A shipowner's widow might need to oversee cargo shipments, settle debts with foreign merchants, or even arbitrate crew disputes, all impossible if society barred her from public life. Temple records show priestesses of Astarte administering sizable treasuries and land holdings, their economic influence rivaling male counterparts. Even in religion, their pantheon balanced male and female deities, with Astarte worshipped not just as a fertility figure but as a patron of seafaring and warfare. This pragmatism extended to marriage customs. While Greek women required dowries that burdened their families, Phoenician brides often received their own capital, sometimes entire trading vessels, as starting funds for joint commercial ventures with their husbands. Divorce stelae reveal women retaining their assets post-separation, and prenuptial contracts from Carthage specify wives' rights to independently manage inherited properties. Such provisions weren't about modern ideals of equality but cold calculation. In a civilization built on commerce, restricting half the population's economic potential made no sense. Yet this openness had limits. No evidence suggests women captained ships or fought as soldiers, and elite women still faced expectations to bear heirs. The very documents celebrating their autonomy also reveal societal tensions. A 3rd century BCE Carthaginian inscription praises a woman for being modest as befits her sex, despite her business acumen, betraying lingering double standards. The true measure of their influence lies in the panic it provoked abroad. Greek writers like Aristotle expressed shock at Carthaginian women's political sway, while Roman historians sneered at effeminate Phoenician men who let their women think. These barbed comments unwittingly testify to a society that, for its time, recognized talent over tradition, a flexibility that may explain how a small coastal people left such an outsized mark on history. Their greatest innovation wasn't purple dye or alphabet letters, but the radical notion that civilization moves faster when everyone gets to row. Long before credit cards or digital transfers, the Phoenicians faced a dilemma familiar to any modern business: how to move vast wealth quickly and fairly across thousands of miles. Their solution revolutionized commerce forever: the world's first standardized coinage. Picture a merchant in ancient byblos unloading a shipment of cedar logs in Egypt. Instead of haggling over the weight and purity of silver ingots, he receives a handful of uniformly sized discs, each stamped with the unmistakable image of a galley ship. These weren't just pieces of metal, they were portable trust, a promise recognized from Sardinia to Sidon. What set Phoenician coins apart was their blend of practicality and symbolism. Early versions minted in 5th century BC Tyre featured the sea god Melkart on one side and an owl later adopted by Athenian drachmas on the reverse. But the real genius lay in their consistency. Unlike irregular lumps of bullion, each coin contained a precise weight of electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy. Traders could count rather than weigh them, slashing transaction times at crowded docks. Maritime motifs like dolphins and anchors served dual purposes. They celebrated Phoenician identity while functioning as anti-fraud measures. Counterfeiters struggled to replicate the intricate designs pressed by official dies, much like today's watermarks on banknotes. This system didn't just ease trade, it transformed economies. Coins enabled new forms of credit, with lenders accepting them as collateral for voyages. Sailors could now be paid in uniform currency rather than goods, fostering specialized professions far from home. Even taxation evolved. Carthage collected harbor fees in coins bearing the goddess Tanit's likeness, creating an early example of fiscal policy. The psychological impact ran deeper still. Holding a Phoenician coin meant holding a piece of their empire's reputation, a tangible connection to distant powers. Their innovations eerily foreshadow modern finance. Tyrian shekels became the Mediterranean's reserve currency, trusted even by Jerusalem's temple to pay annual tributes. Archaeologists find Phoenician coins in Celtic hoards and Greek marketplaces, often worn smooth from decades of circulation, proof of their universal acceptance. When Rome later conquered Carthage, they didn't abolish its currency but rebranded it, recognizing a system too effective to discard. Yet the greatest testament to their vision lies in what these coins carried beyond value. Every stamped ship and sea creature whispered the same message. Commerce isn't just about goods, but the shared language of exchange. In that sense, every swipe of a credit card today still echoes those first Phoenician mints, turning trust into something you can hold in your hand. The Mediterranean wasn't big enough for two superpowers. As Greek city-states flexed their newfound maritime muscles in the 8th century BCE, Phoenician merchants watched with wary eyes. What began as friendly exchanges of pottery and olive oil soon hardened into a cutthroat rivalry for control of trade routes, resources, and ultimately, the future of globalization. The Greeks had a knack for reverse engineering Phoenician innovations. Their biremes evolved into sleeker triremes. Their coastal trading posts sprouted into full-fledged colonies. But the Phoenicians weren't about to surrender their hard-won networks without a fight. Harbor cities became fortresses overnight. Tyre's famous double walls now bristled with anti-siege engines, while Greek settlements like Syracuse dug labyrinthine canals to trap enemy ships. Naval architects raced to outdo each other. Phoenician shipwrights added reinforced rams below the waterline, while Greek designers staggered oarsmen on 3 levels for devastating speed. The arms race spilled onto the battlefield during the Persian Wars, when Phoenician fleets formed the backbone of Persia's navy against Greek freedom. At the pivotal Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, their ships nearly crushed the outnumbered Greeks until Themistocles lured them into narrow straits where maneuverability trumped numbers. Yet this wasn't just a clash of oars and arrows. It was a contest of philosophies. The Greeks saw trade as an extension of politics, their colonies outposts of Hellenic culture. Phoenicians viewed commerce as its own sovereign realm, where profit trumped national allegiance, hence their willingness to serve Persian kings if it meant protecting trade privileges. Their rivalry birthed unintended consequences. Greek merchants, barred from Phoenician-dominated routes, ventured farther west, planting colonies in Corsica and southern France. Phoenicians, in turn, pushed past Gibraltar to secure Atlantic tin sources, inadvertently expanding the known world, the most lasting legacy of this struggle. Innovation born of necessity, Greek sailors adopted Phoenician celestial navigation techniques while perfecting their own harbor signaling systems. Phoenician glassmakers, facing Greek competition, invented blown glass to mass-produce cheaper wares. Even their alphabets cross-pollinated. The Greeks added vowels to the Phoenician script, creating a tool that would later spread across Europe. What looked like a zero-sum game actually propelled the ancient world forward. Every intercepted trade ship spurred faster hull designs. Every blockaded port inspired new navigation tricks. By the time Rome entered the scene, these two rivals had collectively charted the Mediterranean, standardized maritime law, and proven that competition, however fierce, could sail humanity into uncharted waters. Beneath the shadows of Tyre and Carthage, lesser-known Phoenician cities hummed with just as much life and ambition. Take Arwad, a tiny island fortress off Syria's coast no larger than a few football fields, yet it commanded the northern trade routes like a watchful sentinel. Its secret, a double harbor system still visible today, one side welcoming merchant ships laden with Anatolian silver, the other sheltering warships ready to defend the lucrative flow. Walk its weathered streets now, and you'll stumble upon the remains of dye vats and shipyards, proof that even this modest outpost was a linchpin in the Phoenician machine. Then there's Berytus, modern-day Beirut, where ancient history hides in plain sight. Construction crews digging for high rises routinely uncover Phoenician warehouses stacked with amphorae, their interiors still stained with traces of wine and olive oil. One remarkable find, a 4th century BC tomb packed not with gold, but with delicate glass perfume bottles, likely the stock of a merchant who traded luxury goods until his final voyage. These discoveries shatter the myth that Phoenician wealth came only from Tyrian purple or Spanish silver. Everyday commerce in pottery, textiles, and even scented oils fueled their empire too. Venture south to Sirte in Lebanon, and the past feels startlingly intimate. Archaeologists unearthed a potter's workshop frozen in time, its kilns surrounded by discarded figurines, some expertly crafted, others lopsided from apprentice hands. Nearby, a child's grave held a toy boat carved from cedar, a poignant reminder that even in these bustling trade hubs, life unfolded with all its ordinary joys and sorrows. What makes these lesser-known sites so revealing is how they mirror the Phoenician genius for adaptation. At Motia, a tiny island colony off Sicily, engineers built an artificial lagoon to service ships too large for natural harbors. In Kishon, Cyprus, smelting furnaces stood just streets away from temples, blending industry and worship seamlessly. Each city, whether a mighty capital or a quiet way station, operated like a single cell in a vast organism, specialized, interconnected, and utterly vital. The real surprise isn't how much we've found, but how much still lies buried. Satellite imagery hints at submerged ports near Tripoli, while ground-penetrating radar in Cadiz reveals a grid of streets beneath modern Spain. Every shard of pottery, every corroded anchor pulled from the seabed adds another stitch to the tapestry of history's first global traders. Their legacy wasn't just written in grand monuments, but in the quiet corners of 100 forgotten cities where commerce and culture once thrived. The Phoenician dinner table was a map of their maritime empire. Every bite told a story of distant shores and daring voyages. Picture a merchant's feast in Carthage around 400 BC. Platters of briny olives cured with Greek herbs, steaming flatbreads drizzled with golden olive oil from Spanish groves, and skewers of tuna caught off Sardinia's coast, glazed with a sweet sour sauce of Lebanese grape molasses. This wasn't just sustenance, it was edible diplomacy, a fusion of flavors as complex as their trade networks. Take the humble pomegranate, a fruit they carried from Persia to the Mediterranean. Phoenician sailors prized its juicy arils not just for taste but for practicality. The tough rind kept them fresh during long voyages, while the seeds provided vital vitamin C to ward off scurvy. In Cadiz, archaeologists found charred pomegranate seeds in kitchen waste pits, evidence that this exotic fruit became a staple in Western colonies. But the real revelation was discovering the same seeds in Sardinian tombs, placed alongside the dead as a symbol of rebirth, proof that Phoenicians didn't just transport food, but the cultural meanings baked into every ingredient. Their role as culinary innovators shines brightest in their fish salting factories. Along North Africa's coast, they built sprawling complexes where Atlantic catch was layered with mountain salt and left to ferment into garum, a pungent fish sauce that became the ancient world's ketchup. A single Carthaginian workshop could produce thousands of amphorae annually, shipped as far as Pompeii's elite kitchens. Recent excavations in Tunisia revealed something astonishing. Isotopic analysis showed some garum contained fish from as far north as Brittany, suggesting Phoenician ships made covert Atlantic runs beyond documented routes. Wine tells another tale of adaptation. Phoenician vineyards in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley cultivated robust grapes that could survive sea journeys, but their real genius was in packaging. They pioneered the use of resin-lined clay jars to prevent spoilage, a technique later adopted by Greek and Roman vintners. Shipwrecks off Malta yielded jars still bearing Phoenician merchant marks, aged 5 years, scratched beside a ship's symbol, making them history's first vintage labels. Perhaps most surprising was their sweet tooth. In Carthage, bakeries combined local honey with imported sesame from Mesopotamia to create hava-like confections, while date syrup from Egypt sweetened nut-stuffed pastries. A clay tablet from Ugarit details a merchant's order for 3 jars of Cypriot figs, 2 of Sidonian pine nuts, painting a portrait of ancient dessert culture thriving across borders. This culinary alchemy went both ways. Phoenicians introduced eggplants from India to the Mediterranean, while bringing back Sicilian pistachios to Levantine markets. Their diet became a living archive of exchange, where every meal celebrated the audacity to explore, adapt, and savor the world's bounty long before globalization became a buzzword. The idea that Phoenician ships could have crossed the Atlantic centuries before the Vikings, or even Columbus, taps into something timeless: our fascination with the bold, the improbable, and the unexplained. Take the Bat Creek Stone, a curious artifact unearthed in 19th century Tennessee, etched with markings some claim resemble Paleo-Hebrew script. Or the Paraíba inscription from Brazil, a now-lost stone tablet allegedly bearing Phoenician writing about storm-tossed sailors. These tantalizing finds ignite debates in academic circles and amateur history forums alike. Could the masters of Mediterranean navigation have ventured far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, riding ocean currents to uncharted continents? Mainstream archaeology remains deeply skeptical, and for good reason. The Bat Creek Stone's inscriptions, once hailed as proof of ancient Semitic visitors, were later shown to match a 19th century Masonic cipher. The Paraíba stone vanished before proper analysis, leaving only contested sketches. Even the famous Phoenician coins found in New England turned out to be 18th century British tokens. The hard evidence simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Yet the persistence of these theories reveals something far more interesting than their truth: the Phoenicians' near-mythic reputation as explorers who defied limits. What fuels these legends isn't just wishful thinking, but the very real audacity of Phoenician voyages we can prove. When Hanno the Navigator sailed down Africa's west coast around 500 BCE, he recorded encountering gorillas, which he called hairy people, and volcanic peaks that touched the stars. His journey, documented in the Periplus of Hanno, stretched over 2,000 miles beyond Gibraltar, a distance comparable to crossing the Atlantic from Morocco to the Caribbean. If they could brave those waters, why not the Atlantic's wider expanse? Oceanographers note that the Canary Current can carry vessels westward almost effortlessly, a natural conveyor belt that later Spanish ships used to reach the Americas. The counterargument lies in logistics. Phoenician ships, though revolutionary for coastal trade, lacked the deep holds and water storage needed for month-long open ocean crossings. Their navigation relied on celestial markers and known coastlines, tools useless in a featureless Atlantic. And crucially, no Phoenician settlement debris, distinct pottery shards, or DNA traces have surfaced in the Americas, unlike the clear Viking footprint at Eland's Ox Meadows. Perhaps the most compelling case against transatlantic voyages is the Phoenicians themselves. These were pragmatic traders, not aimless adventurers. Every risky expedition served commercial ends, securing tin, establishing trade posts, or monopolizing dye routes. Without evidence of profitable return cargoes like American maize or tobacco in Mediterranean archaeological layers, the economic motive vanishes. Yet the debate's real value isn't in proving or disproving Atlantic crossings. It's in recognizing how the Phoenicians stretched humanity's idea of the possible. Their verified journeys to Britain and West Africa were just as unimaginable to most ancient peoples as America would have been. Whether myth or missed history, these tales endure because they mirror the Phoenician spirit, a refusal to let horizons, however distant, remain uncharted. The Phoenicians didn't just build ships, they reimagined the relationship between wood and water. At the heart of their maritime revolution lay the keel, a structural spine running beneath the hull that transformed seafaring forever. Picture a cedar trunk carved into a long, tapered beam, its curve engineered to slice through waves rather than fight them. This wasn't merely an upgrade, it was a paradigm shift. Where earlier vessels wallowed in rough seas like hollowed-out logs, Phoenician keels provided unprecedented stability, allowing ships to carry heavier cargo without capsizing. Modern naval architects still refer to this principle as longitudinal strength, the same concept that stabilizes everything from container ships to ocean liners today. But the keel was only the beginning. Phoenician shipwrights added another lethal innovation, the bronze ram, a weapon as elegant as it was devastating. Cast in the shape of a sea monster's snout and mounted just below the waterline, it turned ships into guided missiles. During battles, crews rowed at full speed to drive this reinforced prow straight into enemy hulls, splintering planks below the waterline where repairs were impossible. The tactic was so effective that Greek and Roman navies copied it wholesale, with Athenian triremes later perfecting the design into a three-bladed battering ram. Archaeologists studying the Marsala Punic shipwreck off Sicily found traces of these rams, their metal alloys carefully mixed to balance hardness and flexibility, an ancient precursor to modern metallurgical engineering. What truly set their shipbuilding apart was its modular ingenuity. Instead of constructing vessels as monolithic pieces, Phoenicians used prefabricated sections, whole planks drilled with precise mortise and tenon joints that locked together like puzzle pieces. This allowed for rapid repairs at distant colonies, a game changer when a damaged ship couldn't sail home for dry dock. Recent 3D scans of a 1st century BC wreck near Malta reveal these joints remained watertight after 2 millennia underwater, a testament to their precision. Even the Romans, masters of engineering, adopted this technique for their famed grain ships, some of which stretched longer than a football field. their legacy echoes in unexpected places. The V-shaped hulls of modern speedboats, a direct descendant of Phoenician designs optimized for cutting through choppy waters, the watertight bulkheads on cruise ships. An evolution of the compartmentalized storage holds Phoenicians used to prevent cargo shifts during storms. Even the concept of a ship's ribs, those curved wooden frames giving vessels their shape, originated in their workshops, where craftsmen steamed Lebanese cedar over fires to bend it into graceful hydrodynamic curves. The ultimate proof of their genius lies in the ships they didn't build. By refusing to share their advanced techniques, Phoenicians maintained naval superiority for centuries. Greek historians tell of captured Phoenician pilots deliberately steering enemy ships onto rocks rather than revealing navigational secrets. This obsession with secrecy might explain why no complete Phoenician warship has ever been found. Just fragments whispering of a civilization that treated shipbuilding not as a craft, but as a sacred art. When we marvel at today's megaships crossing oceans with ease, we're glimpsing the end of a chain of innovation that began with those first daring voyages into the unknown. Every time you write a grocery list or glance at a map, you're touching fragments of a language 3,000 years old. The word alphabet itself is a direct nod to the Phoenicians, a mashup of aleph and bet, their names for the first two letters. But their linguistic fingerprints go far deeper than that. Take something as simple as ordering wine at dinner. The Greek word oinos, Latin vinum, and even the English wine all trace back to the Phoenician yain, a term that sailed across the Mediterranean alongside amphorae of their finest vintages. Maritime vocabulary is practically a Phoenician time capsule. Galley, the term for ancient oared ships, springs from their word galley, meaning wave rider. Navigators still use starboard, a descendant of the Phoenician Tyre, describing the steering paddle on a ship's right side. Even anchor comes from their term anchor, a weighted hook that kept their vessels steady in stormy ports. These aren't just borrowed words, they're linguistic artifacts, preserving the tools and techniques that made them masters of the sea. Place names tell another layer of their story. Spain originates from Hispania, their phrase for land of rabbits, coined when traders encountered the region's wild abundance. Lisbon evolved from Ollie's Abo, or safe harbor, a testament to the sheltered bays they sought. Sardinia's capital, Cagliari, still echoes the Phoenician Cael, meaning stony place, while Cyprus's Kishon lives on in modern Larnaca, its name morphing from their word for walled town. Each syllable is a breadcrumb marking their colonial footprint. The real surprise lies in everyday objects. That sack of flour in your pantry, the term comes from sack, their word for woven storage bags. Cumin, the spice rattling in your kitchen cabinet, preserves the Phoenician camen. Even jewel descends from gohil, their term for precious stones traded along coastal routes. Their language didn't just fade, it dissolved into the linguistic groundwater, resurfacing in places we'd never think to look. Perhaps their most enduring linguistic gift was standardization. Before the Phoenician alphabet, writing was a labyrinth of symbols. Egyptian hieroglyphs required knowing over 700 characters. By distilling language to 22 consonants, they created a system so adaptable that Greeks could add vowels, Romans could tweak shapes, and centuries later, you could text a friend using its great-great-grandchild's script. The next time you type a letter, remember, you're tapping keys that stretch back to merchants scratching invoices on wax tablets, proving that some trades never really end, they just change form. The Mediterranean's depths guard secrets like a locked archive, and modern archaeologists have become its codebreakers. Off the coast of Malta, A storm in 2016 exposed a Phoenician shipwreck buried for 26 centuries, its cargo hold still packed with ceramic amphorae, their pointed bases designed to wedge securely into ship ballast. But these weren't just empty jars. Residue analysis revealed traces of almonds, honey, and a type of fish sauce that matched recipes from Carthaginian cookery tablets. Suddenly, a single shipwreck transformed from a pile of broken pottery into a floating grocery list, proving Phoenician merchants traded perishable delicacies across hundreds of miles with meticulous care. Even more revealing are the deep-sea discoveries made possible by robotic submersibles. Near the island of Gozo, sonar scans detected a second wreck lying under nearly 400 feet of water, a depth once thought unreachable for ancient sailors. The ship's copper ingots bore distinctive chemical fingerprints tracing them to Cypriot mines, while its anchor stones were carved from a sandstone only found near Tyre. This wasn't just a random vessel lost at sea. It was a missing puzzle piece confirming written accounts of direct Cyprus-Tyre trade routes that scholars had debated for decades. Then there's the genetic revolution rewriting Phoenician history. Scientists sampling modern populations along ancient trade routes made a startling discovery. In coastal Lebanon, 1 in 3 men carries a distinctive Y chromosome haplogroup also found in Sardinia, southern Spain, and Tunisia, precisely where Phoenician colonies thrived. These aren't just abstract percentages, they're biological breadcrumbs marking the intimate legacy of sailors who left more than goods behind. In Cadiz, a 2,500-year-old skeleton buried with a Phoenician amulet turned out to have North African ancestry, suggesting local women married into trading communities, blending cultures at the most personal level. Every artifact forces historians to reconsider old certainties. For years, scholars assumed Phoenicians primarily exported luxury goods like purple dye and glass. But underwater excavations near Sicily uncovered a different story. Bulk cargoes of raw wool packed alongside loom weights, proving they traded industrial-scale textiles too. Another wreck near Ibiza carried hundreds of lead ingots stamped with Phoenician letters not for the lead itself, but for the silver extracted from it, revealing sophisticated metallurgical supply chains. The most humbling lesson: how much we still don't know. Less than 5% of the Mediterranean's ancient wrecks have been surveyed, and each new find appends assumptions. A recently discovered anchor off Ashkelon bears inscriptions suggesting Phoenicians sailed further up the Nile than previously thought. A child's toy boat found in Carthage matches miniature votive ships from Tyre, hinting at shared childhood rituals across their empire. These aren't just relics, they're whispers from a civilization that refuses to be silent, reminding us that history isn't carved in stone, it's waiting to be dredged from the deep, one astonishing clue at a time. The Phoenicians may have vanished from the world stage 2 millennia ago, but they never truly left our collective imagination. Gustave Flaubert's Salammbô, a lush 19th-century novel set in Carthage, painted them as decadent and tragic, a civilization drowning in its own opulence, with priestesses draped in purple silks and mercenaries brawling in moonlit temples. Flaubert's Carthage was less history than fever dream, but it cemented an enduring archetype, the Phoenician as a figure of both brilliance and excess, a cautionary tale about the perils of wealth and ambition. This romanticized vision resonated because it tapped into deeper anxieties about globalization, making the past feel unnervingly familiar. Fast forward to modern gaming, and you'll find Phoenicians cast in a very different light. In Sid Meier's Civilization, they're master strategists, their unique ability, Mediterranean colonies, granting bonuses for coastal settlements, a nod to their real-world knack for turning rocky shorelines into trade empires. The game's Dido, Queen of Carthage, isn't the doomed heroine of Virgil's Aeneid but a shrewd leader who outmaneuvers rivals with economic prowess. Meanwhile, indie games like Expeditions, Rome cast them as shadowy puppet masters, pulling strings behind wars and political upheavals. These portrayals, though simplified, capture something essential: their legacy as innovators who thrived in the margins between great powers. Even Hollywood can't resist their allure, though often with shaky accuracy. The 1960 epic Hannibal starred Victor Mature as a Carthaginian general with more brawn than nuance, while documentaries lean heavily on CGI fleets and sunken treasures to evoke their maritime might. What's striking isn't the factual errors, like Carthaginians wearing Egyptian headdresses, but the persistence of certain tropes. Whether depicted as cunning merchants or tragic anti-heroes, the Phoenicians are forever outsiders, too clever for their own good, too ambitious to coexist peacefully with Rome or Greece. This cultural recycling reveals less about the Phoenicians themselves than about us. When modern writers cast them as proto-capitalists, we're projecting our own debates about commerce and morality onto the ancient world. When games cast Dido as a feminist icon, we're reframing her story through contemporary values. Even their infamous child sacrifice rituals, hotly debated by scholars, get repurposed as dystopian imagery in fantasy novels, a shorthand for exotic barbarity. Yet perhaps the most authentic tribute lies where you'd least expect it. In Lebanon today, Phoenician imagery adverts everything from beer labels to bank logos, a source of national pride reclaimed from colonial-era narratives. Schools teach children the alphabet's Phoenician roots, and artists reimagine ship designs in sleek modern sculptures along Beirut's waterfront. Here, they're not villains or victims, but ancestors, proof that history's most enduring legacy isn't written in stone or ink, but in the stories we choose to keep alive. The Phoenicians didn't just move goods across the ancient world, they moved the very boundaries of what was possible. Think about the last time you ordered something online and tracked its journey across continents. In a way, you are participating in a ritual they perfected 3,000 years ago, the delicate dance of supply and demand stretched across vast distances. Their ships were more than wooden hulls and sails. They were floating synapses, transmitting not just spices and silver, but the DNA of civilization itself. The alphabet you're reading now, the concept of standardized currency in your wallet, even the global trade routes that deliver your morning coffee, all bear the invisible fingerprints of those daring seafarers. What's most striking isn't the scale of their achievements, but how quietly they reshaped the world. Unlike the pyramids or the Parthenon, Phoenician landmarks weren't stone monuments but living systems, a network of trust between merchants in Tyre and miners in Cornwall, the shared understanding that a handshake or a clay tablet could bridge languages and cultures. When a Greek potter adapted Phoenician glaze techniques or a Spanish farmer planted their olive saplings, they weren't just adopting new methods. They were knitting together a Mediterranean that felt, for the first time, like a connected whole. That legacy hums beneath the surface of our modern world. The next time you see a container ship glide into harbor, remember the Phoenician merchants who first proved that distance is no match for human ingenuity. When you tap out a text message, consider how their 22-letter alphabet became the skeleton of half the world's scripts. Even the word globalization feels inadequate. They weren't just connecting places, they were rewiring how societies thought about space, time, and possibility. So here's to the original pioneers of the interconnected world, the ones who looked at the horizon and saw not an end but a beginning. If their story sparks your curiosity, share your thoughts below. Which forgotten trailblazers should we explore next? The Vikings' trade routes, the Silk Road's unsung heroes, Hit like, subscribe, and let's keep unraveling history's most fascinating threads together. Until then, keep your compass pointed toward adventure. The past isn't just behind us, it's all around us, waiting to be discovered.